My name is Doug Montgomery, and my connection with the Natick Community Farm happened back in 1974. I had just gotten out of the service, the United States Navy, and I read in the paper, the director at the time was Mark Winnie, and he was looking for some volunteer work on the Natick Community Farm. And I was a machinist in the Navy, and I said maybe he can use some help with machining. So I contacted Mark Winning, and he had some ideas. One of the things he wanted a uh, power and water for the barn, and I went to the library and looked up some designs for windmills, uh, and this particular windmill it was called a Savonius windmill, and it was made out of basically bicycle parts, and it also uh, employed one 55-gallon barrel split right down the middle, and then you move the two barrel halves apart approximately a foot and a half so it would catch the wind. The barrel was mounted on I think it was maybe 6 to 7 foot piece of uh, a plywood, mm-hmm. And it was very circular. So, to make a long story short, I mounted the barrel on this piece of plywood and used piping that Mark supplied for me to attach the windmill to the side of the barn. And that was going to be our windmill. Now, the electricity part came in the form of a 12-volt alternator out of a car. And the 12-volt alternator ran on the outside of the plywood, and there was bicycle tubing, rubber tubing all along the outside where the generator or alternator would run, and this would get us 12 volts of electricity for the barn, and it would be stored in a battery. Now, on the bottom of the windmill was a crankshaft, or actually a pedal, that it was taken off of a bicycle, and this was going to run a water pump. And we had to dig a hole directly underneath the windmill to approximately 5 to 6 feet, or at least until we hit water, so we could get water from, we're going to call this a well, and went from there. It was primitive back then. There was Mark had planted, I think, grapes nearer the stream that runs on the property, and what he wanted was to grow grapes. And he also planted corn and some easy crops, maybe peas and beans. And there wasn't too much in the back by the farm or by the barn back here. And just a little later on, he hired a helper by the name of Steve Shabbat. And this guy was an amazing with animals. He had a cow named Daisy, and it was either Daisy for the cow, and he had a goat. So I don't know which one. They milked the cow for milk, and I don't. I think they just used the raw milk, and I actually took a little bit, about a pint, and boiled it. Didn't boil it. Brought it up to, I think it's 108 degrees to pasteurize it, and drank that. It was pretty cool. I had never milked a cow in my life. Being a new kid, milking a cow was a kind of a cool thing for me. And now the goat, whichever its name was, a lot of the kids back then were, well, they smoked, and it wasn't the greatest thing for them to do, but as kind of a remembrance that they were smoking, the goat happened to love tobacco and ate the cigarettes, and that was kind of the punishment for the kids. They had to give the goat a cigarette without the filter for punishment of doing something or smoking, whatever. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I don't remember the name of the gentleman before all this happened. I think so we could step foot on here. George Ames, I think, was his name, and I remember him and a gentleman by the last name of Wallace. And I remember a meeting and Mark and I talking about the Natick Community Farm and setting this whole thing up. And it was George Ames and Mr. Wallace who kind of set us up here and gave us permission to do these things, some ideas. When I got out of the Navy, of course, as a young kid, I had a job as a machinist in town, and whenever I could, I came over here because it was something to do, and I love nature and being out and helping somebody with some issues and some problems, um, and wanted to give back to the town because the town gave me something. It gave me an education and gave me what I knew and what I believed. I always had this fascination with maple sugaring. I had heard about it. I had never seen it. I looked it up in some books. I never knew how much a tree could produce of sugary water, and so I kind of got interested in it. It takes 40 gallons of maple sap to equal 1 gallon of maple syrup. So Mark went up to Vermont and found a old maple syrup evaporator, just the evaporator. I don't think he brought back the arch because that's where I came in. Uh, Being a machinist at the time, I rebuilt the arch for that size evaporator. It was a liter evaporator, and he found a barn somewhere. It wasn't here, but I worked in this old barn for, I don't know, maybe about 6 weeks. He got the metal for me, the steel or the aluminum or whatever the material was, and I rebuilt. I had to look up what a liter evaporator arch looked like, and he got the rails, the whole rails that the evaporator sat in, but he didn't have the metal down below, and that's what I did. I built the metal frame for the firebox, and then he had a gentleman, a mason, I think, come in and just put the bricks in the metal frame, and then he had the arch put in. Uh, and I spent many an hour uh, maple sugaring because he taught me how to, when you have to put all this water or sap in and it has to boil and go through the channels, and at the final stage you have maple syrup, and I think he bought a hydrometer to test the sugar content of the maple syrup to find out when it was just about right. uh, I loved doing that. I had nothing else to do as a young man, so I volunteered some nights to come over and just boil water, basically, and that was a lot of fun. But there's an interesting story that is connected to it. Uh, Mark, of course, was married to a lady. Can I mention the name? Yeah. Sue Jensen. Mark Winnie married a lady named Sue Jensen. Now, Mark's wife, Sue, had a single sister, and her name was Janet. So, unbeknownst to me, Mark uh, set up some kids. I brought some kids, and he had some kids in another car, and Janet was in that car. We went out maple sugaring, and we collected all the saps. We drilled the trees and put buckets on them. Uh, my identification, and it's a kind of a maybe a town joke, that he says I tapped some telephone poles, not knowing what a maple tree identification 101. But anyway, getting back to the full story, Janet, unbeknownst to me, was in the other car with the other kids, and I was in my car and driving around tapping trees. And she got a look at me, but I never saw this lady. So, sometime after that, after we were tapping trees, uh, I was told that, well, there's this lady that would sort of kind of like to meet you. Would you be interested in a double date with my wife and I to go out to a movie? And you'll meeting Janet's sister. I'm sorry, Sue's sister, Janet. So we did that, and I have to say that the Sugar Shack was indeed the Sugar Shack, and I ended up marrying the lady, and we've been together for some 40 years, uh, and it's been a fun time.
That's amazing. So met sugaring.
Yes, we did. So it was a sweet success all around. We made maple syrup, and I got married to a lovely lady.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a very cool.
I found okay.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I learned how to make maple syrup, and I found out and learned all about love. The funny stories, other than tapping telephone poles and maybe a birch tree every here and there, I wasn't the greatest identifier of maple trees, even though Mark showed me a picture of a maple tree. But when you're young and crazy and foolish, it kind of falls by the wayside. Um, Crazy stories. Well, it was a fun time all together, and it was hard work, uh, which I didn't mind, and I love hard work. Um, but other than that, I don't really have too many other fun stories other than the experience of working for the Natick, well, it was at the time the Natick Community Farm, not Natick Organic.
Natick Community Organic Farm.
Or
yeah.
Yes, yes.
So it was pre-organic.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I will say that Steve was he was into organics, but I think the soil and everything was too fresh with whatever was growing here in order to qualify for organics. So I think after time and with proper farming techniques, it became organic. Education, and education is key. Education is power. Uh, I come from, well, I was a resident of Natick all my life, but now that I moved to Connecticut, Connecticut is a lot. I have everything around me, which is cow farming and agriculture. And I think now, in today's, well, I will tell you, in today's world, agriculture and farming is extremely important. But back then, it wasn't so prevalent for farming. But I believe when people such as yourself stick to and educate today's kids about farming and sustainability, I believe that is the future. And if anything, I learned again, knowledge is power, and being able to feed the community and help the kids in the community learn about agriculture. I mean, you can become a doctor and a lawyer, but they have to eat too.
We're losing that connection with, with folks knowing where a food comes from or knowing how things
Yes,
are grown.
yeah, it just comes from a gigantic manufacturer, but you're helping the community and you're helping the kids, the kids in the community to learn about sustainable farming, uh, growing vegetables, animal husbandry, and where it all comes from, the roots. I hope it grows a little bit larger. I don't know how restricted you are on the community or the land you sit on, but everything is not perfect. You need to fine tune some things, manage and organize where you are now. And I think with community support, which I believe you have from the town of Natick, it'll become better than it is now, although it's pretty good looking to me now. Well, I will say back then, I was into building stuff. I have no idea why. Well, I was just mechanically handy, but I built a apple cider press out of desk parts and pallets. The three middle staves in a pallet are made out of oak. There's nothing on earth harder than, well, there is harder than oak. But so I took apart a pallet and went to the library and got a picture and directions for building your own cider press. And there's Dow Orchards, I think, is in Natick.
Yeah.
And they were, I think, going to uh, sell the land or something, and Mark was told to
I think
I
it's
think it Dowes. Dows.
oh, maybe it's Dow's. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Mark had. Oh, I'm sorry. Mark had
Okay.
gotten some apples. I think there were seconds, and consequently, when he was trying to raise money for some of his projects here, and down at the your Elliott Street office is where I press the stuff, basically in your kitchen. I He got a bushel of apples, and I was turning out apple cider out of this thing, and I used a car jack for the press, and the press went up against like it would your bumper, but it went up against those oak stays because it was the oak that was the only thing that would do it, and it had metal rods through it and a base, and you have to have all these little frames with a muslin, and you put the apples in there after they've been chewed up. I made a chewer out of a rolling pin and a rolling pin. Well, it was a hopper, a rolling pin, and flathead screws were into it. And it was motor run by a washing machine motor, and it just chewed the apples up into the muslin frame, and it made this little block of apple ciders, and you move it down to the next section, which was the press, and you put the jack down, and all this lovely apple cider fell out. And I think it wasn't too mushy because it was already filtered through the muslin, and he sold the apple cider through that.
That's amazing. Wow. I mean, the sense of being able to like use
Yes,
things. Yeah.
different things on a farm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he also, within the year, I had, I like cooking. So I taught some of his kids, and I think when I got out of the Navy, I went to work for about 2 or 3 years for a tool company while I was working here. And then I went to college and got a degree in culinary arts. So I think we were still here, and I went from 78 to 79 to college and went and became a chef, and came back, and we presented the board of Natick Community Farms at that time, and I taught the kids how to cook this meal. It was, and a lot of the vegetables, salad was from this farm. The meat was not from this farm. Daisy was still alive. So, yeah, we served the dinner, a very simple dinner, and the kids from this farm cooked the meal, served it, and everything was, and they loved it.